When I was in kindergarten, the other students would make fun of me because I didn't know how to ride a bike. It wasn't because I wasn't willing to learn or that I didn't have anyone who offered to teach me. It was because my family couldn't afford a bike. In fact, during some winters, my family couldn't even afford to keep our heater on and had our electricity turned off. So I never asked my parents for a bike, but secretly they knew. Because every afternoon after school, as I'm playing in the front yard, I would just look at all my friends and all my classmates just riding off into the sunset while I just sit there wondering what it'd be just for one day to be able to ride a bike. When I was 5, my dad took me to work with him on Christmas Eve. Because it was Christmas Eve, everyone was allowed to go home early. And as my dad and I were driving back home, my dad stopped by into our driveway and looked at our neighbor's yard. And he noticed that during the day, my neighbor had thrown away a used pink bike. And he kept staring at it for a moment. And even at the age of 5, I realized what was going on in my dad's mind. And I knew the social consequences that I would have to endure. Because across the street, I saw 2 of my classmates. I would only imagine what kind of jokes they would make if they saw me riding a pink bike, or that they saw that my dad was going through somebody else's trash. So I turned to my dad and I said, "Dad, please, I don't want the bike. No, no, no." Son, it's a perfect size for you. "Dad, please, it's pink, it's a girl's bike, no." You shouldn't worry what other people say and think. "Dad, please, we just go home, we go inside." But my dad wouldn't listen to me. And instead, my dad opened up the door to our minivan and walked over to my neighbor's yard, knocked on their door, and a minute later, our neighbors came out. And our neighbor said, "Sure, of course you can have the bike." And a minute later, my dad walked the bike and me back into our house. And that day, my dad taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. He taught me that when you ask for something you want, the worst that could happen is someone that tells you no. Every day in our lives, we're faced with a decision. We either go and seize the opportunities that are in front of us with the probability that there is rejection, or we can avoid the rejection and never ask. Most of us choose not to ask. And for most part, this is a very reasonable decision. Researcher Daniel Kahneman says that people tend to place more weight onto rejection when taking a gamble and a risk than there actually are. So in other words, we tend to overestimate the probability that someone will tell us no and underestimate our chance of success that someone will tell us yes. As a result, we miss out on connections. We miss out on dates because we believe that the other person would never say yes to us. We miss out on jobs because we don't think we're qualified for them. And we don't ask for help because we don't think we deserve it. Consequently, those dates never happen. The jobs never land to us. And the help that we need never comes. But what if we can change that? What if we were willing to accept rejection, knowing that what we think the worst case scenario is, most likely will never happen, if at all? When I was applying to college, I remember back to what my dad did for me all those 17 years ago. I grew up in one of the poorest areas of Atlanta. To give you an idea of the type of school district I went to, we became the first school district in 40 years in the US to lose our accreditation. The news media called us the worst school district in the US. And in fact, even people in our community would joke that our school system had more problems than we did graduates. As much as my teachers and my counselors wanted me to succeed and go to college, they didn't know how to help me. So I turned into the best way that I could. By searching online, I found boards and forums and websites where parents and students met to talk about how to get their child or themselves into college. And I started sending messages, emails, anything that I could get their attention, asking for their advice. How should I study for the SAT? How do I apply for college? What is financial aid like? And what should I look for in a recommendation letter? Anything that I had a question, I would just send it right away. And to finance my way through Yale, I would apply for any single scholarship that I found online or just randomly. I even applied for one called Women in Technology. The result I received from doing this was, well, out of 300 messages I sent, more than 200 never replied. And out of the 200 or so scholarships I applied for, almost 200 of them rejected me. But I also received about 4 dozen emails with encouraging letters and advice about how I could study for the SAT, how to write a really compelling essay, and just words of encouragement for me as I go through my process. And over 3 dozen foundations believed in me and sponsored my way through Yale so that I would leave debt-free. If it wasn't for the help that I was receiving, I wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for the risk that I took, I wouldn't be here. But it's not just me. When I started looking back to my dad and what he did when he asked to bike, I'll always remember the expression on our neighbor's face. Here they were, helping a family in need, have the greatest, potentially a great Christmas Eve by giving a gift. And I can imagine when I emailed all of my supporters and all the foundations who supported me along the way, the kind of joy they had when they knew that I had succeeded and got in a place at Yale. Every day we're faced with a decision to make, and we can either choose to accept that rejection is a possibility or we can avoid it. For me, I think back to my dad and what he did, and the kind of courage and humility it must have taken for my dad to go through our neighbor's yard and literally go through their trash to pick out a bike for me. Because later that day, as I was in bed, my dad was preparing a surprise for me the next morning. On Christmas Day, when I woke up, under our Christmas tree was the same bike that my dad picked out the day before. Instead, I noticed that overnight, my dad had painted it blue and even placed training wheels on the bike. And for the first time, later that day, I rode a bike for the first time. And I'll never forget the amazing Christmas that I had. That was made possible because my dad was willing to accept the fact that he might be rejected. And the type of possibility and the happiness that he created because he was willing to go out of his way and ask. My family eventually gave the bike away to another family who needed it, but I secretly kept a part of the bike. I kept one of the pink ribbons that came from one of the handlebars. Every day, when I'm faced with a choice, if I should ask a cute girl to lunch, or to ask a famous author to dinner, or even my professor for an extension on my paper, I think back to my dad and what he did for me that day, about the bike that I would not have gotten had it been for my dad not asking. And I remember that you don't get what you don't ask for. Thank you.